The second portion of our program continues with photography in Flux. I'd like just to take a minute and thank our sponsors. The NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, has been very generous this year, and we thank them. The MJSA, we'd like to thank them for perennially sponsoring the Professional Development Seminar. The shift from emulsion to megabyte has changed the mechanics of the image. Our work is still in many ways only as good as the image of it. Printed pages now share their communication stage with blogs, social networks, and virtual venues, which drive trends in photographic styling and sensibility, which in turn affect how our work is perceived and even valued. As we began to put together the photography portion of our morning, questions seemed to multiply exponentially. It was amazing. We started out with one question and we ended up with 1 million. So we offer this learned panel of pros, photographers, editors, and luminaries, in hopes that some of these questions can be examined.
Yes, why do photos matter? I do see a lot of images. I run Craft House. I used to have a gallery for contemporary fine art, and I'm putting a little book together. So as you can imagine, loads of images. In most cases, the images are really, really good, and I can use them, and that makes me very happy because it makes my life so much easier. So I'm going to give you some glamour shots of some really, really good images. This is Marissa Zahneholz, Stacey Lee Weber. Basically what I wanted to say is very, very often the images are really good and I can use them, but sometimes things go wrong. And the problems that I see most often with images are, I'd say the number one problem is that the image is blurry. I mean, the images are blurry. The object in the image is out of focus. It's underlit. And like a pet peeve of mine is when people kind of hold up their work in a photo and you have a finger or an arm in it. And I can't tell you how distracting that is, because the purpose of a photo is to show your work and not a body part. So these are the things that can go wrong. We're here with our panelists to talk about what is a good photo. And a good photo consists obviously the quality of the photo itself, but also the content of the photo, the styling of the photo. So we're here going forth with our panelists.
Well, the work of our next speaker, photographer Doug Yaple, is widely known and highly regarded. His art and craft images have appeared in over 40 books, produced by publishers such as Lark, Sterling, Schiffer, Interweave, and Bryn Morgan. He has worked alongside artists and makers in a variety of media to document instructional text, including Chasing and Repoussé, Methods Ancient and Modern by Megan Corwin, and you've seen his images on the cover of 1000 Rings and the magazines Metalsmith, Ornament, and of course, Good Fruit Grower. You don't want to miss that one. He is also an exceptional portrait photographer. I first met Doug in 1988 when he began shooting my work. His lens and the quality of his images have certainly opened doors for me. Please welcome my friend, colleague, and fellow English major, Doug Yaple.
Hi. Obviously, I'm Doug Yaple, and that's Maple with a Y. Andy, thank you for the kind words, and I think for getting me involved in this. And I want to thank Snag for having me up here as well today and be able to talk to you about photography. I've been involved in photography for over 30 years. And my first love, as you might guess, from the shots that I'm going to show, because it's my 7 minutes, are portraits. And I really love doing them. I still like to do them and add them to the mix, but that's not the bulk of what I do. It's just kind of a side thing that I do for my own rejuvenation, if you will. Recently, I got involved with the Portage Bay Cafe here in South Lake Union, and we worked together to create a changing gallery wall in their restaurant. We're highlighting their emphasis and dedication to organic foods. So I went around to all their suppliers a couple years ago and photographed the people that actually bring the food to the table. And we'll be updating that wall this summer. This is Oxbow Farms. That was Full Circle Farms before. They're both in the Carnation Valley here. About 25 years ago, I met an artist and became friends with Sharon Portelance. She's now teaching at Maine College of Art. She allowed me to try my hand at documenting her work. And I must have done okay because Sharon, in turn, introduced me to Andy Cooperman. That was a very fortuitous meeting. It is Andy's patience, natural talent for teaching, and gift for words that have been instrumental in my understanding of the language of art and how the language of photography differ, and how to find that common ground so that we work together to achieve the common goal, which is to make your work look as best as we can. And it was a niche market, and I liked it. I still like it. I like the collaboration with you, the artist. I like the challenge presented by the work itself. Commercial advertising work usually has layers of people involved, but with art, it's mostly one-on-one. And I get to see some really interesting stuff. Your creativity never ceases to amaze me. A few years ago, I was fortunate enough to begin working with artists and publishers on book projects, including some retrospectives and others documenting techniques that are used in the various disciplines. These are from the Chasing a Represé book that Nancy Megan Corwin and I worked on. It's been wonderful to watch the artistic process such as this, and to see the work and what it looks like during the making of it and during the creation. I never knew before what goes into it. And to me, it's a magical transformation that is just, it helps me understand the work better, and helps me come to the work with more appreciation of the effort involved in it. Now, creating descriptive images and making sure we match the action in the text was probably the biggest challenge of working on those books, but it was still very rewarding. Obviously, when we work together, you, the artists, and us, the photographers, our goal is to make the most effective image we can that's in 2 dimensions from a 3-dimensional object. We use light, shadow, depth of field, and the occasional hot glue to get it done. Online retail websites, the social media, and blogs are opening up new avenues for self-promotion, but then also ultimately giving you the responsibility for marketing your own work. Yet you face the same old questions of how best to get your voice heard, how to show your work, which is the basis of what we're doing here today to talk about. As service providers, collaborative marketing partners, we use a visual language to represent your work so people will really see it, want to understand it, get it, and of course, buy it. Now, the artwork and the market that image is aimed at should drive the decisions on how to represent the work. What is the image to be used for? Online advertising like Etsy, articles in print, postcards, books, cover shots, or jury submissions? I don't think there is a one-size panacea that fits all the occasions. And I know what we want is an answer, but there are no set rules. There are more like guidelines. For example, in this image, when you're working on your shots to look at pieces, it's critical to position it so the story of the piece comes out. Now, Jennifer did a really quick sculpture like this, and I asked if I could use it to set an example. And as you turned it around, whether you could read it or not became very evident. You see, in this work of Candace's, the texture on the surface as well as her shapes are critical, and bringing that texture out is so important. In Jennifer's work, I wanted to show a comparison of backgrounds. I have long used a gradation because I like the drama that's involved, and I think the white on the right, because of her high key silver work, tends to wash it out and flattens it out as well. Now, in this case for Jana, the book and the rings get tied together with a very dramatic lighting so that the shadow is cast on the book, and that almost physically ties them in the image and keeps your eye between the title and the rings themselves. Joan, who has intimate knowledge of the Inuit culture, uses it often inner work. And so that element has to come out. It has to be highlighted and done in a manner that's as undistracting as possible. This is Jan Smith's work, and her attempt at behavior modification here was emphasized by having a dark background really let the paper rejoinders jump out at you and really be punchy. Now, Megan's, she also does a lot of surface detail. But on the left, I wanted the bud to stand prominently out on the top of her vase. But on the right, I didn't want any background to really distract from the piece. And so a very soft gradation seemed to be the ticket there. Sometimes a body form can work as a descriptive element, especially for an advertising or a postcard. In this case, Judy and I used a mannequin to show how her necklace lays. And here, Lori Talcott, with some of her more conceptual rings, we posed on a hand. If they were on a surface, it'd be really hard to get the concept of a ring down. You wouldn't see the shank. You would only see the top of it. And so the message might be lost. With Vina's work, the gesture of a hand is critical in seeing it and really understanding it and reading it. So as you look at these two, you can see which one tells you more information about the piece. In addition, creating shadows can help explain what the piece is, also Vina's, but you see the shadows underneath that really emphasize the holes in the bracelet. Here, Patty's rich reds in her piece, they pop like a stoplight at night. And for Ron's brooch, which I think he used for a postcard, the jacket really leads the average guy by the hand into the possible world of wearing jewelry. Now, when you explore three-dimensional artwork, it's hard for one image to cover all the bases. In this work of Catherine Griset's, exploring it from different angles was crucial to understanding the work, and getting in really close is a help as well. Mary Hu's work is always evocative and beautiful. On the right, the bracelet, I think, is helped by the shadow to describe what it is. Her work is so fluid, it's easy for the eye to get lost as it explores it. But in this case, the shadow tells us that the center is open and helps describe it as a bracelet. And finally, Anika Smulovitz makes a point with her B pointer for the importance about details. Don't overlook getting in tight to accent something that's critical. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Doug's lecture brought up many of the issues that we have to look forward to discussing today at the lunch discussion. I also want to point out that in your handout, Doug Yaple made a fabulous handout about working with your photographer. Remember, your handouts are available online. I'm going to introduce Christopher Conrad. The way that images are viewed and where they appear and in what context has changed, and the once crisp line between art and craft images and product photography is blurring. Artists and makers are looking beyond the photographic sensibilities that once was our treasured standard, and we're looking for something fresh, which is what inspired this conversation today. For 32 years, Christopher Conrad has created award-winning and stock photos, food, product advertising, packaging, cookbooks, and a baker's dozen of commercial applications. His stock image company, C Square, was formed at the vanguard of the royalty-free images on the internet. Let's welcome Christopher Conrad.
Good morning. Before I start, I need to admit something. I'm not an expert on fine art photography or craft photography. I know less than nothing about the new methods of social media and marketing. I'm certain everyone else on this esteemed panel knows much more about me, about what editors want or expect than I do. And they certainly know more about doing quite a bit of other things than I do, too. However, once in a while, an artist friend of mine asks me to create images of their work, so I guess that's why I'm here. What I do know is a thing or two about how to create quality images. My world of expertise is as a commercial advertising photographer. I primarily work and collaborate with ad agencies, design firms, and marketing departments. In other words, what I do is create quality images, and quality sells. So I'm here to help you learn how you can make and increase the quality of the images that you're producing yourself, because you're not always going to be working with a professional photographer. Sometimes you're going to need to do work for yourself. Sometimes it's projects that are like going on to Etsy and things like that, where it's just not practical to work with professionals. I'm going to give you some tips and pointers and explanations on how to do better photography for yourselves. Among the list of questions Harriet provided me was, should you shoot on white, dark, or gradated backgrounds? I actually recommend against gradated because, unless you're working with professionals, because they're very difficult to work with and to light properly and to light your work properly against. Most times, particularly if you're doing things on Etsy, you're going to do what are called isolated images or knockouts shot on white backgrounds. And later in this presentation, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about doing drop shadows and making those knockout shots look better. But the answer to should you shoot on white, black, or graded is simply you should choose the best background setting or props that will best complement and accentuate the qualities of the products that you're shooting. With the caveat that this golden rule being that you're cognizant and aware of how the final image is going to be used and if there are any specific restrictions or requirements set by the editors or the publications that you're shooting for. The other topic on the list was what can artists do to make their shots better. So I'm here to give you a few tips on how you can improve your own picture taking, and I'll finish with giving you a link to a handout for doing a nifty Photoshop technique. So what can you do to make your shots better? Work with good light. Don't work with room lights. Don't work with mixed lights when you have fluorescence and tungsten light in the room. Ideally work in a room that has large picture windows and set up your background or your little sets and work with that light that you have. Make sure that you're not mixing. If you have room lights on, turn them off. You really want to light with just daylight if you can. You can augment with your flash because that's the same color temperature typically. Be careful if you have colored walls in your room, like a green wall or a blue wall, because that will throw a cast back onto and part of your lighting. So try to work with as neutral or as indirect of light as possible that's clean. There are tools that shape and modify light. You can use white cards to bounce light back onto your products. You can use gray cards to modify reflections. You can use black cards to subtract or help shape the lighting that's on your products. Silver cards can put light in hard-to-reach areas or in shadow areas that will open up details. If you're getting direct sunlight, build a softbox. And there's a very easy way of doing this. You take a PVC, which is that plumber's pipe, and you can make a frame, and you stretch over that frame ripstop nylon or vellum or tissue, and so now you have this beautiful softbox that the light can come through and create a beautiful soft light on your products. It's excellent for reflective surfaces, and what you can also do for gradations is put black cards near or on the softbox, and that will give you beautiful gradations on the reflections of the items that you're shooting. Next thing, tripod. This is one of the simplest things to create continuity in your work. Put your camera on a tripod. This is very important if you can do this, because if you're working with indirect light, typically you have longer exposures. And if you're hand-holding, you're going to get a little bit of shake, and that gives you blurry pictures. You don't want that. But you do want to use lower ISOs rather than higher ISOs, because they're going to give you less noise on your film, on your images. And it allows you to have slower shutter speeds and smaller apertures, although I'll give a point about aperture in a moment. When you have the smaller the aperture, the deeper your depth of field. If you don't. The other thing is use a cable release when you have that camera on the tripod, because your finger moving the camera is going to also create camera shake. So by using a cable release or remote firing, your camera stays absolutely still and perfect. Here's a trick that I have found invaluable over the years. If you're shooting flat geometric objects or frames or quilts or anything like that, and you want to be optically square to the item, put the item down, put a mirror in the middle of the item, and then take your camera, and when you can see the lens of your camera in the middle of that mirror, you're optically square. It has to be. If you're off at all, you won't be square to the item. So once you see the mirror in the center of the camera, you're optically square, and then you'll get no parallax, and you'll get a perfectly square shot, or a perfectly parallel shot with your lines. Sharper images. While you do want to use a smaller depth of field for greater depth, a smaller aperture for greater depth of field, don't go to the smallest aperture on your camera. It is invariably going to degrade the quality of your image. Better to back up a foot or two and use a slightly larger aperture and then crop your image. You don't need to fill your frame. So use slightly larger apertures to get the sharpest and highest resolution on your images. And then knockouts. A lot of times you folks are going to be doing your items and then knocking them out onto white backgrounds. And a lot of times you just leave them floating. The problem with that is that it looks like they're floating. They're not grounded. They just look like they're in ether. By adding a drop shadow, it grounds your subject. It eliminates that cutout floating look. And the problem is that FX drop shadows aren't realistic, and that's what the little handout that Harriet's going to have up on her website here. So why are drop shadows important? Here's an isolated shot of strawberries, and it's just floating. It has no drop shadow. It's just knocked out. That's with a drop shadow. Suddenly it feels like it's sitting on a table. It's there. Which looks better to you? Here are a few last thoughts, and I'll close with. You are all skilled craftsmen and craftspeople who know a whole lot more about making jewelry than I ever will. And just as there's a right way for alloying a metal, there is a right way for capturing images. With the advent of prosumer cameras and Photoshop, I recognize that many of you are shooting more and more of your own images, and I've just provided you some tips on how you can increase the quality of those images that you take. But take a moment and consider this one question. If I had an idea for a fancy ring, should I go to Deb Stoner and ask her how I should make it myself, or would it be better served by engaging the talented artists such as yourselves to take my idea and turn it into reality? So if you're a talented amateur who has taken the time to learn Photoshop, really have the skills to control light and create high-quality images for advertising and marketing and print, that's great. But many of you are better at creating art from metal and from glass or even from Legos. So if you aren't one of these talented amateurs, if photography is not truly your niche, my best advice to you is to seek out a good professional photographer. Not your next-door neighbor's nephew who has bought the newest digital camera, but a professional. Because just as you know the best ways to create your work, a professional photographer will know the best ways to create quality images of your work. That's my presentation.
Christopher Conrad prepared an amazing handout for you. We could spend an entire day going over this one handout. His handout provides you step-by-step instructions for how you can add a very soft and realistic drop shadow to your images. Not one of those fake shadows that look like a blob, but a really good one. But the handout and this tutorial is so amazing that we can't have time to do it today. It's available on my website, and my website, just to make sure everybody knows, is Harriet-Estelle-Berman. It's on your handout. You look for the Professional Development Seminar page, and his step-by-step handout will be available for you to download. Very glad to hear that the new one will be 5 megabytes. See that tiny URL at the bottom of the screen? That tiny URL, if you want to write it down, that's a quick way for you to find not only Christopher Conrad's handouts, but the handouts for the entire Professional Development Seminar, which you are welcome to share with your friends and fellow artists that did not attend the conference. It's available for you, this information, use it.
Great pleasure to introduce our next panelist. Roger Schreiber is a Seattle-based photographer who aims his camera at people and various craft media alike. Equally well-versed in shooting three-dimensional artwork, interiors for architects and designers, ceramic sculpture, and glass pieces, he has also worked with metalsmiths like Lisa Kimoshita, Dixie Darling, and Stephanie Tomczak. Roger is well known for being the official Pilchuck photographer in the 80s, spending entire summers photographing the key players and events for the school's publicity needs. Roger's photos have appeared in American Craft, Glass Quarterly, Glass Art, Neues Glas, Threads, Dolls, Ornament, Smithsonian, Sunset, and Esquire, and in many, many other publications. Talking to us today about how contemporary craft is photographed, please welcome Roger Schreiber.
Morning. I'm going to talk like these other two guys about how you can shoot your own artwork and stay out of trouble. I understand, I've been told that many of you already photograph your work and the rest of you are thinking of photographing your own work, which is, as you already know, a very difficult task. It's hard to shoot a small, highly reflective piece of metal, and it becomes complicated when you're the one who made that small, highly reflective piece of metal. But now you have a new role. You're a photographer. You've got to develop an objective view. You've got to take a step back from making it, take a look at it, decide what the soul of that piece is. And making art is a lot like raising children. The art is going to turn out to be something entirely different than you expected when you began. So the objective view is very important. I have a couple of questions that I'd like you to consider long before you pick up a camera. One of them is, who is going to look at this photograph? Who's your audience? Who is the viewer? That's going to tell you a lot about how you photograph the work. It's going to help you decide what kind of background you want to use, how dramatic the lighting is going to be. If you're going to use a model, how you want to use the model. Perhaps you have an earring you want to hang in the model's ear, and your model has 3 additional holes in her ear. Something you didn't think about during the photo shoot because piercings are so ubiquitous these days. But the viewer is going to look at that photograph and wonder why, when you made that earring, you didn't take advantage of those other 3 holes in her ear. It's very important to remember that everything that falls within the frame of a photograph has an effect on what the viewer thinks of your work. So here's where the objective view and a step back is very important. You have to look at the entire photograph, the shadows, the highlights, not just at your work. You have to stop obsessing about that little screw that didn't quite work in the glasses. There are a lot of different juries that your photos will be speaking to. If you're just shooting for yourself, it's perfectly all right to flop that necklace down on the tablecloth you used at dinner the morning before. You're the only one who's going to, the night before, you're the only one who's going to be looking at it. But when a jury looks at it, or when Martha here looks at it, reviewing photos submissions to her book, she's going to wonder what it is, what statement you're trying to make, what relationship there is between that pesto and your jewelry. Perhaps you want to do an advertising shot for a magazine. You want to do a marketing shot for yourself, in which case it's great to bring in a background that has a lot more energy, a lot more motion to it. Bring in some other elements that might talk to the theme you have running through a line of jewelry. When you're shooting for a jury, you want to make the photograph simpler. You want to think how you want to hang that necklace, or maybe you don't want to hang it at all. Maybe you want to lay it flat on a tabletop and shoot at an oblique angle. Maybe you want to stand the ring up and shoot straight down at the top. And you have a necklace you want to hang on your model. Well, perhaps while you're shooting, you decide you would like to show that necklace off a little differently and have the model wear it somewhere else, because you want to tell a different story to a different audience. Now it's time to get all your ducks in a row. It's important to long before the shoot, think about what you need for the shoot. Not only the backgrounds, but you've got to pull that tripod out of the closet you haven't looked at in years. And it's important also, if you're using a model, to decide to have a conversation with her long ahead of time about clothing changes, about hairstyles, and about makeup. Film had a way of showing up the corpuscles just below the skin so that noses and cheeks looked far more red on a slide than they did to your eyes. Well, digital cameras have a way of seeking out bad complexion. They are unrelenting and unforgiving when it comes to dry skin. So makeup is extremely important. Too much makeup will be a detraction from the photograph. Not enough, and then the viewer is going to wonder what relationship you're trying to make between that red splotch of dry skin on your model's face and the necklace she's wearing. So before you start shooting, make a list of everything you know. While you're still making the piece, think about how you want it to look in a photograph. You want to take a step back, give yourself a break, give yourself enough time that the photo shot deserves. Remember that more people are going to see that photograph than actually see the piece of art. So the photograph has a significance far greater than you'd like it to have. But you also want to take a step back and give your art the respect that it deserves. Thank you.
This concludes our Photography in Flux Part 1 with professional photographers Doug Yaple, Christopher Conrad, and Roger Schreiber. The Photography in Flux handout includes links to online digital photography tutorials, photography tips, and guidelines for working with photographers at the web link listed on this slide. Additional presentations with audio recordings are available. In fact, all 3 hours of programming content from the 2011 SNAG Professional Development Seminar and the lunch discussion were recorded. The presentations and audio recordings are divided into 5 segments. Segment 1, Niche Marketing, includes insights from 3 entrepreneurial experts. There is also a Niche Marketing PDF handout. Segment 2, Digital Images, is a tutorial about digital image file extensions. A 1-page PDF handout provides a handy guide. Segment 3, Photography in Flux Part 1, offers the perspective from 3 professional photographers. The Photography in Flux handout includes links to online digital photography tutorials, photography tips, and guidelines for working with photographers. Segment 4, Photography in Flux Part 2, provides informative comments from 2 print media editors with examples of both great and unacceptable images. Segment 5, there is a lively podcast of the question and answer lunch discussion between the speakers and the audience participants. Finally, look for the PowerPoint tutorial and companion step-by-step PDF handout on how to build a better drop shadow. In conclusion, we would like to thank our 2 sponsors for their support: the NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, MJSA, Manufacturing Jewelers and Suppliers of America, and of course, SNAG. Use the links on this final slide for updates throughout the year and for information about upcoming programming.